I'm Max Keiser.
I'm Kathleen Cleaver.
Well, this is the Keiser Report. There must be a big story here. Talk to me.
Well, Max, it appears that your billboard in Times Square was spotted. Your $500 silver if you want it. We received this tweet from Sean Ono Lennon. Max and Stacy are like the Eldridge Cleaver and Kathleen Cleaver of the financial revolution, that this time will be televised.
That sounds righteous.
Well, Eldridge Cleaver was the Minister of Information for the Black Panther Party, and he was, standing up against the oppressor that kept them in ghettos. And you and I here on the Keiser Report are resisting the financial oppressors that keep us in debt ghettos.
That's right, and he's also famous for a pair of trousers that he designed, the Eldridge Cleaver sleeve. These are the pants I wear when I'm doing the show.
So I want to show you that the financial war is on, and this war is over if you want it. JP Morgan chief says bank rules anti-US.
Yeah, I saw that. Tell us more.
So JP Morgan chief executive Jamie Dimon was interviewed in the Financial Times. And he said, I'm very close to thinking the United States shouldn't be in Basel anymore. I would not have agreed to rules that are blatantly anti-American. Our regulators should go there and say it's not in the interest of the United States. We're not doing it. And this refers to raising Tier 1 capital to 9.5% in relation to the banks that are too big to fail, including JP Morgan.
Now, I'm really tired of JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon treating America like a special needs child. I'm tired of him trying to convince the world that America needs to be coddled and treated like a baby. Americans want to compete. They can compete, except for banks like JP Morgan that have snuffed it down with too much debt. If Jamie Dimon resigned, if JP Morgan were shut down, this would be the greatest possible thing for American competitiveness, because he's choking the competitive spigot with his debt fraud and debt pushing. He's the terrorist. Jamie Dimon, I don't say that to be glib, Stacy Herbert. I'm saying that because he fits the profile of a terrorist. He's a psychopath. He follows an outdated ideology, and he's willing to kill himself for his god, money.
Well, I think it's actually terrorists tend to use asymmetric warfare because they themselves are weak and they cannot fight against the power of the empire. So in this case, I think JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon are the empire. They are operating the financial war. They are carpet bombing us with debt. And so it makes sense that people are saying Yankee go home, like in the Vietnam War, of course.
What? Vietnam War is getting more and more resonance in this era because you've got the stagflation. You've got the Eldridge Cleaver, Kathleen Cleaver of the Give Financial Peace a Chance movement back on stage. You've got the Eldridge Cleaver pants, which will be coming back in a huge way.
And of course, during the Vietnam War, we saw Agent Orange used to carpet bomb the nation of Vietnam. Our current Agent Orange in this financial war is high frequency trading. The 300 million pound cable that will save traders milliseconds. So this is a nearly $500 million cable being laid from New York to London. And this is in order to save 6 milliseconds over the current 65 milliseconds that it takes to cross the current cables.
Yeah, these high-frequency trading in this 300 million pound project, high frequency trading is looting, okay? Now, this is what I don't understand about David Cameron in the UK. He castigates the looters and the rioters, but all they're doing is emulating JP Morgan bankers. They're looting. This is a high-frequency trading looting. And they're getting the government. They're getting these people who are looting, sticks of juicy fruit gum on the street because they're having their money stolen to pay for high-frequency trading looting. Of course they're going to be looting. Of course you invited this into your own homes because you support looters at the banks in the City of London. And that new initiative to split the two banks in between the Casino Bank and the Utility Bank in the UK, of course that's been delayed another 5 or 6 years because David Cameron lives on looting. He is in fact a terrorist as well. And I say that not to be glib. I say that as a point of fact. Cameron and Osborne are terrorists. They're financial terrorists. They're committing financial oppression. They're killing people.
But to put this into context, how much they can loot, 1 millisecond advantage could be worth up to $100 million per year to the bottom line of a large hedge fund. So Max, you know markets. Where do they get this $100 million in profits per 1 millisecond?
By stepping in front of normal trading activity on the exchange. And when buyers and sellers come together to effect a trade, if you can step in front of those two and create a meta trade that interrupts the normal functioning of markets and steal a few pennies from that price discovery moment, you get to loot a few pennies. Multiply that times $1 trillion, and you've got many, many billions of dollars worth of illicit profits that go into the bottom line, which incidentally is never reported because it's held off balance sheet or in a shadow banking system or in a pet off balance sheet bank. JP Morgan, the Enron of our times, they're going to zero. Especially if we get $500 silver. Then JP Morgan is definitely going to silver, and that major financial terrorist will be wiped out.
Well, Max, London is the heart of this financial war, and wherever you find financial mercenaries and warriors, you find prostitutes. Lap dancing takes off among students struggling with fees. So apparently, students in the UK have been saddled with debt up to £9,000 per year in these fees, and they're turning to lap dancing. So London has become kind of the Saigon of this financial war.
They love you a long time.
Me love you long time. Me love you long time.
I mean, where's Oliver Stone in all this? Anyway, you know, it's funny because the airport ramp from the airport in Nice that goes on to the Promenade des Anglais, no matter what country is having the worst financial crisis at that moment, there's usually prostitutes from that country on that off-ramp. You see them on your coming out of the airport. And I wouldn't be surprised to see young American girls there soon prostituting themselves because of the financial Armageddon that's visited upon them from their fearless leader, oh glorious Obama.
Well, it turns out that 18% of the lap dancers at this one lap dancing chain in London are college students. And the owner of this chain says that these girls are very popular because his clients often don't expect them to be knowledgeable and interesting as well as attractive.
Oh, they like to have a lap dance and talk about interest rate differentials from School of Economics co-eds that unfortunately have to prostitute themselves because Osborne and Cameron raised the tuition fee to pay out to bail out the banks. Osborne must be down at these clubs every night. Mrs. Osborne, you should want your husband to be a little bit more above board with his economic policies, or else you're going to lose him to this 22-year-old shiksa down at the Rhinoceros lap dancing spot.
So the carpet bombing began 9/11, 2001, that annual holiday in America. Since 9/11, it has paid to own silver, gold, and oil. Again, this is the asymmetric warfare that we have identified with the $500 silver if you want it. You can end this financial war. It's in your power to end this financial war. The best performing asset, according to Wall Street Journal, was silver. It's been up more than 900% since the 11th of September, 2001. Gold was a healthy second, up 568%, and oil up over 200%.
No, we called it. In 2002, we said go 90% of your portfolio into gold and silver. I haven't changed my allocation since then. I'm still 90% gold and silver.
But Max, what about the psyops here? Because the dollar in that time is down 34%. But if you were to look at the other financial news programs, you would think that the safe haven during this entire time has always been the US dollar. Those get prominent headlines, and you would think, in fact, that the volatile, dangerous asset to associate yourself with is silver.
Because the psyops, the mainstream media like CNBC, is a propaganda outlet. Like, again, the Vietnam War. If you look at those Vietnam War movies, there's always some chick on a speaker, someone saying, "You Americans, you'll never win this war," type of thing. That's what CNBC is all about. They're flooding the airwaves with propaganda that the dollar is good and that precious metals are bad. And of course, they're going to lose this war because silver's going to 500 thanks to you.
And of course, many in the West think somehow that they're not the ones also being carpet bombed. So let's look at this other headline, and this is from January of 2011. The difference 10 years makes. And the chart is literally a picture that tells 1,000 words. Employment down, income down, household net worth down, GDP up. And yet incomes were down, Max. That means that workers were sharing none of it. Wealth of the average household down. Corporate profits up. Obviously, you see that number there, the most.
Yes, corporations have been given carte blanche, all the money they could possibly ever want from the government, and they don't have to hire anybody. As a matter of fact, they can fire people. So again, it's a model of terrorism.
And you see the two columns to the right are health insurance and oil prices. Those are up. And health insurance, of course, is part of the financial sector. Many Americans don't understand that. They don't believe it. They will call it socialism if you try to take that debt away from them.
Yeah.
But it's financial war.
Well, Americans are stupid because they'll participate in Groupon for discounts on nail care or sushi, but they won't want a group discount on health care.
So let's talk about more of this financial war and the debt bombs being thrown at everybody. Two final headlines here, Max. G8 raises Arab Spring financing pledge to $38 billion. So they've doubled the amount they're pledging. And remember, the PSYOPs, they make it sound like we're giving aid to these people in the Arab Spring countries. And in fact, it's all loans, almost all of it, by the G7 countries, including France, Italy, on the verge of collapse. Where do these people get the money? The IMF is also pledging $35 billion in aid debt to these countries. Where do they get the money?
Yeah, they're occupying these countries with debt. It's debt, as we've been saying, debt terrorism. It's
debt terrorism, debt carpet bombing of these countries.
Yeah, it's debt used as an instrument of control, and it's just been spreading for decades. Christine Lagarde, new IMF head, she understands this philosophy very well. She's a debt prostitute. She's a debt madam, if you will. She's a debt madam, and these countries are debt prostitutes.
Oh, you mean Christine Lagarde? She loves Arab Spring long time?
Oh, yeah.
So, and then here's another part of this financial war here, Max. Savers miss out on £43 billion in interest since March 2008. So figures from the Bank of England suggest that savers have lost more than $43 billion since bank rate was cut to 0.5% 2.5 years ago. But borrowers have benefited to the tune of more than £51 billion as they have paid less in interest on their loans over the same period.
Right, the math doesn't add up. If you want to restore the economy, raise interest rates so people can save money and that you have capital as the basis of capitalism, but nobody's interested in that anymore.
And I have one final thing to say on this, Max, and that is that to put this into context, in the UK at the moment, there's a raging debate about this 50% tax. The bankers are resisting it, but the 50% tax rate will raise $12.6 billion over 5 years. Here, $43 billion stolen from savers over 2.5 years, and they remain silent.
Hey, we're here making the noise for the savers. We're defending the interest of the savers. We're the Kathleen and Eldridge Cleaver of the new 70s Give Financial Peace a Chance movement, says our friend Sean Ono-Lennon.
Silver Liberation Army all the way.
I'm loving it. Stay right there. Much more coming your way, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Manila and talk with Zeus Yamayanis. Zeus is an economics futurist and guest blogger at of2minds.com. Zeus, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me, Max.
All right, Zeus, we covered one of your recent posts on the Keiser Report called Endgame, When Debt is Fraud, Debt Forgiveness is the Last and Only Remedy. Tell us about the argument you make for debt forgiveness.
Well, one of the most basic arguments for debt forgiveness has to do with arguments that have been brought up by your guest Michael Hudson and myself and others, and that's simply that debt, especially when interest is attached to it, goes on indefinitely, and it goes up eventually. Even if it's a small interest, it eventually goes up exponentially. Now, actual economies don't follow that trajectory. They usually plateau out a little bit and even decline at points. And if you have debt that will go on come hell or high water, and economies that fall off or even out after a time, what's going to happen is that more and more of the productive capacity of those economies are going to have to go into servicing the debt to the point where the fruits of labor and the fruits of production will be entirely consumed at some point, and then assets have to be cannibalized to pay off for the debt. And clearly, people, the only way to get around that is to just try to ignore it. But at the point we are at now, especially when it's compounded by fraud and debts that are just thrown into the system of tens and maybe even hundreds of trillions of dollars, it just makes a real solid case for saying, we don't know which debts are valid, which ones are not. We know the basic mathematics of debt. We need debt forgiveness to basically zero the value scale, reestablish and reward productivity, and start out again with our value creation going from the right perspective.
Right. So because of compounded rate of interest, the debt is expanding exponentially, whereas any growth scenario to pay off that debt is bound by an arithmetic growth curve. So these two will never meet. So paying off the debt is impossible. But let me read to you a comment that was made on our site from someone named Yuan Moment, who said, quote, "Debt forgiveness would reward people who made stupid decisions and disadvantage the prudent saver." Your response?
Well, I mean, that's a real typical one, but the easiest response to that is to say that's what I'm doing already. I'm a saver. Actually, I don't have debt. I have a pretty decent liquid savings. I don't have a mortgage payment. I don't have car payments. I don't have student loans. But my savings right now are being used to subsidize. I mean, what he was talking about is exactly what's happening now to an extreme degree. My savings are now subsidizing banks' bailouts. They're subsidizing people who are foreclosing, who have defaulted on the mortgage, who are living rent-free. Zero interest rate policies, I'm subsidizing. Quantitative easing, I'm subsidizing. Skyrocketing necessities like food and gas are being complicated by this. And the list just goes on. So the first part of that question would be, that's what we have now, and we have it pretty severely. And the second part I would say is, debt forgiveness is not about rewarding or punishing savers or debtors. It's about reestablishing productivity as the basis. That's the way that I view it anyway. If I had other people's debts absolved right now, I would be immensely helped as a saver, because I wouldn't be subsidizing all this phony wealth, and I wouldn't be subsidizing all this debt out there. And currently, that's exactly what I'm doing. And, there's another thing here, too. I mean, when it comes to relative disadvantage, yes, I would lose a little bit of my bargaining power if I am, not able to sort of go to a debt-stressed homeowner into selling for pennies on the dollar. But that's not what I want. I want quality of life. I want communities that are sound. I don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of empty houses that are just in permanent foreclosure. And I want to be able to go out with my friends without having them work two jobs to try to pay off a lot of this fraudulent debt. So I see debt forgiveness as a way to level a lot of the playing field. And I wanted to make a clarification, though, from my article, which I didn't get into, and that is, this does not mean that there will be no bankruptcy or no criminal or civil prosecution. Quite the contrary. I mean, part of debt forgiveness would have to have those things brought forward as a way to make sure those conditions didn't continue to exert themselves after the debt forgiveness was enacted. And the actual administration of that is for another paper, and I'm actually writing one on that, so I don't want to get into the details, but that's the general framework that I'm dealing with.
Okay, what about the role of the central banks and the IMF, Zeus, in keeping the debt issue unresolved?
Well, I'll go back to what you have either implied or outright stated. These guys are sort of like debt drug pushers. They promise the world that it's going to change if you just invest and borrow money and so forth. And if it doesn't turn out quite right, then you're kind of hooked onto the payments. And those agencies have basically functioned in that way. They've done it through development and funding infrastructure projects that put countries into serious debt, and then they use that debt to gain access to resources and other kinds of things. But I think one of the most important things to understand here, some people, the general public loses this, is that these banks represent and are agents for private profit-seeking banks that benefit usually a fairly narrow slice of the population. They're not there, generally, when you look at their actual activities, to benefit the democracy at large. I look at, for instance, the mandate for the Fed, our central bank, the Federal Reserve, saying to keep unemployment down. And yet, private companies, at least in the short term, benefit from higher unemployment because it depresses wages. So there's a conflict of interest here, and I'm not sure what the role is. I see what the role that they say that they're playing, and I see what the role is that they seem to be actually doing, and that is protecting banks, hiding this fraud, and continuing to say, we just want to extend and pretend and keep these debts going and growing, rather than actually finding a workable way to resolve them. I think this is one of the reasons why debt forgiveness is becoming so compelling. There just isn't an answer going that direction.
Well, it seems like a bit of a cat and mouse game with the IMF and the other pieces of the so-called troika teasing the Greek government and teasing the Greek people about a resolution of this debt problem, while at the same time getting them to sign away their assets through the memorandum, the famous memorandum which gave the troika a place or a piece of Greek assets above and beyond the Greek constitution. Now, it appears as though Greece is on track to lose its sovereignty. As a Greek background yourself, what are your thoughts about that?
I think this is one of the most troubling aspects of this whole thing. I mean, I've been already troubled by the whole disaster capitalism, where these companies have created and even bet against the positions they themselves created to engender suffering in the population, and then they use that position, the position of need that they've created in order to profit or to buy assets of pennies on the dollar. I mean, I thought that was bad enough, but then when you start to go to this level of stripping, countries of their assets and essentially taking them over. Now, they've done that before in more developing countries, more covertly, but now they're just going ahead and they don't seem to have any self-consciousness at all about doing it now to actual established countries in the European Union. So I think it's extraordinarily troubling because the specter is rising of international corporations having a lot more power on a very real practical level than national governments. And I don't think that's a healthy development. I think we're going to have to organize as a global citizenry against that and support Greece and support Greece's sovereignty. And I certainly do from my background, but I do just as a global citizen as well.
Finally, I want to get into this crash JP Morgan buy silver campaign as a way to force a resolution. When I was in Athens last time, I was mobbed everywhere I went because the mainstream media in Athens is not really covering the junta/troika hostile takeover of Greece. We're the only people that are covering that. The crash JP Morgan buy silver campaign is alive and kicking in Greece. Of course, you could include Goldman Sachs in that campaign as well, who fraudulently induced Greece to join the euro by selling them illegitimate, illegal contracts. So your thoughts on the crash JP Morgan buy silver campaign? I understand you're supporting this as well.
I am. First I was skeptical because I saw that JP Morgan, at least from a Zero Hedge article, had basically just dumped their shorts into an unregulated company. But then I started to think about the larger processes. I mean, the first thing, one of my major concerns just as a regular citizen is I want economies that help people make a living rather than make a killing. I think a lot of us have kind of gone off the reservation and taken up this sort of addiction to debt and this exponential growth by demanding entitlements from government and trying to get these huge percentage returns on stocks. And this campaign that you're running is one of the ways to sort of reground and redemocratize, I think, some of this craziness that's happening. First of all, when you're a citizen and you have some gold or silver, especially in Asia, you can use it to barter, you can use it to hold value. It's even a decent investment right now. I think from when you first suggested this campaign, it's almost doubled in price, silver has. But even the bigger picture things, I think, are more compelling. And one is that the more and more you get regular people to buy physical silver, the more and more, first of all, with JP Morgan, the more and more they're forced to take compensatory actions which may or may not be legal, which people can then come back to prosecute them for. And I think that JP Morgan's moving that into that unregulated company may be one of those things. But the second thing is also when you have all this silver paper out there, these exchange-traded funds and so forth, by more people buying up the physical metal, it's making it harder for them to sort of cover their bases or make it look like they actually have the metal they're claiming they represent. So anything that can democratize access to financial resources and put some serious pressure, including pressure around bankruptcy and prosecution on these major firms, is a good thing. And at first I didn't think your campaign was doing that, but as I began to look more deeply at it, I'm beginning to support it more and more and saying, wait a minute, especially if it gained some speed, could really have a leveraged effect on helping bring the empowerment back toward global citizens and away from international private corporations.
That's right. $500 silver is within our reach if we want it. And if you own that SLV, the exchange traded fund, you do not own physical silver. You own only paper, and it will probably not work for you. All right, that's all the time we have for Zeus. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
I appreciate it, Max. Thanks a lot.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Zeus Yamayanis. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.